Penn State defeats Nebraska 31-7 on Friday on the road in Lincoln, and we've got a lot of stuff to talk about, not just about that, but also previewing their showdown with Rutgers on the road for 2 straight weeks. Greg Pickle, wrestling reporter for Blue White Illustrated, here to break all of that down. Plus, national duels, they are going to be a thing, and Penn State's involvement in it, not guaranteed. So that's what we're talking about today on the Penn State Wrestling Show. Greg Pickle, welcome. How you doing today? And interesting, sort of intriguing weekend where Penn State wrestling is very much like football, where it's all about the opponent, the current opponent, the current opponent. I don't want to say 1-0 here, but at the same time, like, we're talking about a lot of things that aren't wrestling on the show today. So what's your gauge of this particular week in this conversation we're going to have today?
Yeah, it's interesting that the national duels are again back in the conversation. For those of you who have followed this conversation closely, you know this is not quite an annual tradition, but very close to it. This idea that there should be a dual meet national champion in addition to the individual NCAA tournament. Penn State has long been against it. We'll get into the reasons why here in a little bit, but Flow Wrestling announced that they are going to bring the national duels back. It's going to be a 16-team invitational event. So this is not run by the NCAA. This is not similar to the individual championships we have every March. This year, of course, they're scheduled to be held in Philly. So this is a tournament that's set for next year. And it's a conversation that's been being had for years around this sport. And Cale Sanderson, I think you were there, but the correct words out of his mouth were, "My stance really hasn't changed from 10 years ago."
Yeah.
And we'll get into why here in a little bit. But yeah, some big picture topics going on as Big Ten wrestling gets underway. Penn State, of course, 2-0, as you mentioned, after beating Michigan State and then Nebraska. And it's time to go on the road to Rutgers, a very good Rutgers team that did not come up during Cale Sanderson's weekly news conference, T. Frank, mostly because there was a lot of big picture stuff to talk about.
Yeah, big picture stuff and a lot of reviewing. A good dual meet against Nebraska, and a lot of juicy topics there for reporters to ask about. So let's get into that. Let's talk about that, and then we'll move on to the national duels before ending the show previewing Rutgers. What was your takeaway from the 31-7 win on the road last Friday?
Yeah, Penn State goes out to Nebraska, wrestles at 9 o'clock Eastern time. For their body clocks, 9 o'clock Eastern time, not a typical time for them. But keep in mind, these guys, when they go to the freestyle international scene, they're wrestling at all sorts of weird time. Of course, they have more days in those countries to prepare for that. It's not a out and back kind of trip like it is at the college level, so a little bit different. But yeah, Cale Sanderson speaking on Monday with reporters, and T. Frank was there talking about the fact that he thought maybe the guys were a little bit tired, maybe they weren't necessarily as sharp as they could have been, which is a fascinating development, and considering they won 8 of 10 matches and had a dominating advantage in the takedown category. I guess the Nebraska guys maybe were a little bit tired too. But in all seriousness, I thought it was a good performance. Obviously Braden Davis and Shane Van Ness lose, and that was, especially Van Ness losing, was a big focus for a lot of people after that match on Friday night and over the weekend. But I was not expecting Cale Sanderson to walk in there on Monday. Look, I know that they're never at their best, and they'll never be at their best, and the closest they'll ever get to being at their best will be the national tournament, which is what they strive to peak for every year. So I get it. It's January, mid-January, when that match was held. So of course he does not think they were at their best. But when he said early in that news conference, T. Frank, that they thought they wrestled, I think, what was it? Not great, but well enough, I think is the way he put it, or some variation of that.
Yeah.
It caught me off guard a little bit. I was following along as you were there, and I thought they wrestled better than that. I really did. That's also why I'm not Cale Sanderson, of course. But
right.
I thought it was a better performance than how his eyes saw it, which was interesting. Because if that is a performance that, I don't know, did you have the feeling he was disappointed in the effort, or not so much?
He did. So I think the sense of not giving their best was what he was really harping on. That it wasn't necessarily that wrestlers won or lost. It's that he didn't feel like they maximized the opportunity, was what I was reading between the lines in terms of what you just said. When you're talking about guys seem like they were tired or they didn't have enough energy, I'm not going to say directly to effort, but there is a maximizing and going all out that he expects from his wrestlers. And if he doesn't feel like he got that, it's interesting because I was caught between, is this motivational coach speak, or in Cale Sanderson isn't a guy that does that. And so right. You have to take him at his word of that. Correct. Wasn't to the standard. And I think when you're talking about a coach that has a high standard for doing your best, putting in your excellence, and leaving it all out on the mat, with their wrestling style. That's more of where I was thinking he was talking about.
Yeah, and I think you're probably right about that. In some matches, Penn State finished with decisions instead of major decisions. Shane Van Ness, like I said, is getting killed for losing. He got taken down in the third period and then got rocked towards the end of that match to make it a little bit of a bigger margin of loss than it looked like. Ridge Levitt beat him 10-2, major decision. Again, I thought he was a little bit slow on the uptake when they were coming back to neutral on the escape and then got caught and then was kind of stuck. There's a lot of people who are freaking out about that and saying Ridge Levitt dominated him, but we watched a different match. And I think that he'll be just fine moving forward. Braden Davis, kind of the same thing, just maybe not quite at the level he needed to be at. And it resulted in, a loss. It looked uglier on paper than maybe it was on the mat. But, again, I think the important thing to remember here is Penn State, in the mind of its very straightforward, very direct, and obviously enormously successful head coach, did not wrestle to its standard. And it won 8 of 10 matches and won 31-7. Like, that's should be,
right.
If people think that this is a team that will set records at the NCAA tournament and do things that few, if any other team has done before it, like, there's a reason why. And it's because you can see it not operate at peak level and still beat the number 6 team in the country 31-7. So, obviously, we probably shouldn't go too much further, T. Frank, without mentioning Luke Lillidahl. I know he was brought up on Monday at the news conference, the freshman at 125 pounds, upset Caleb Smith, moved into the top 10 of the rankings. We talked on last week's show about that being a possibility. He didn't move into the top 5, though. The folks at Intermat were not yet impressed enough with his resume, which is a little light. I will give them that. But he is in the top 10, and he will have continuous chances to move up from here. So, impressive performance from him. An impressive win for Penn State, even if it maybe wasn't to the standard Cale Sanderson wanted it to be.
Yeah, and I want to just reiterate something he said. You can check out Cale Sanderson's press conference on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. We have that for you every week where we're able to get out there and speak with Coach Sanderson. He talked about everyone knows. You watch wrestling, you know what the problem is. You know what the issues are for the individual wrestlers. It's there on film. So it's not about pointing out the mistake. It's about how do you get that wrestler to do the right thing in the moment with fatigue and adrenaline running when their natural instinct is to revert to whatever it is that they've done all the time, to legitimately change their approach and their instincts in the moment. And he says that you can point it out all day. That's the coaching side of it, is how do you actually change their behavior pattern? How do you change the way they react in that moment when they're acting on instinct? And to spin that to the positive, Luke Lillidahl comes in with those instincts of, a late 1-1 tie, and he's able to use, as a freshman against the 6th-ranked wrestler, to be able to get that outcome shows not just his speed and his physical ability, but the instincts he has to know when to do those things and how to do those things in the toughest moments. So that's really, I think, the relief of what you're seeing with Luke Lillidahl and the general conversation about Nebraska, about the dual meet against Nebraska, with some of the criticism coming out of it.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. And I think that, again, for Penn State, it's all about building toward March. And so the coaching points they get from this Nebraska win, a comfortable one from the team perspective, and obviously 8 of 10 starters left there with victories. I just think there's no question in my mind that this will be – we will look back on this Nebraska match, and whether it's Shane Van Ness earning a victory at Nationals or whether it's Braden Davis earning a victory at Nationals or even Big Tens potentially, we will look back on this and probably be able to point to some things, or even some of the guys who won by decision that maybe could have won by major decision. I think we will look back on this match, and I refuse to call a 31-7 win a quote-unquote turning point in this, because that's just silly. But I do think we will look back on
problem,
it and be
right. Covering this team. That's the problem. Is what's the turning point is like 8 years ago when they got the run going, or whenever you want to say. Like it's hard to build the narrative of success, sustained success, and continual perpetual success.
Right. Yes. And so, but I do think we'll look back on this match eventually down the road and say that some of the things that could have went better for Penn State did in a match at some point in the future. So good win. And for Penn State, it's now on the Rutgers, who we'll talk about here in a little bit.
Yeah, so let's talk about the national duels part of Cale Sanderson's press conference. Was asking about the conversation around that, and the part that he said that we didn't talk about early in the show was he made the point we don't need to create events to feel like there's a big event, is how he phrased it. And I'm interested in your perspective of that phraseology, because growing the sport where it's got a passionate fan base, but it is not a mainstream sport, there is this push, it feels continually, to grow the sport and to grow eyeballs and to create spectacles and events. And then Cale Sanderson seems to not focus on that, especially with this particular situation. Am I reading that correctly? Because that's how hopefully I'm paraphrasing him correctly in what he said. What did you take away from his comments about the national duels happening?
Yeah, I want to make it clear these are my comments, but I'm not saying that he'd probably agree with some of them, maybe not. But like to me, so the idea of the college duels is to grow the sport, but you're going to put it on Flow Wrestling, which wrestling fans are already there, and you're going to have people pay for it if they aren't there and want to watch for it. Like to me, if you're talking about growing the sport, you're getting more over the air opportunities for people to stumble into it, like they do in March. Or like they do during the Big Ten tournament, if they have BTM. ESPN obviously has the national tournament. So,
so this is more of a programming play. This is the Big Ten adding an extra football game, so they have more availabilities to sell to networks or to have on BTN.
No, I think it's more that I think there's some good to this. Like they're giving away a good chunk of money for teams just to come to this thing, and then who also wins it. Like there's a pretty significant prize structure at this event. So I think that's good. I do think it will attract interest in the sport, but again, I don't feel like you can say we're doing this to grow the sport when you're putting it behind a paywall on a website that people already like. If you subscribe to Flow Wrestling, I don't think you need the collegiate. You'll take them, like you'll watch them, you'll love every second of it. But is that the reason you're subscribing? Like, I don't see this as the NFL moving to Netflix, I guess is a better way to put it. Like Netflix just announced 19 million subscribers in the most recent business quarter. Like I'm sure they maybe had some kind of show on there that brought people in, but let's be honest, most of those came from the NFL. And I don't see like Flow. All the wrestling people are already there. Like the Flow is not the Netflix to the NFL consumer. For wrestling fans, they're already there. So I just, if you're going to do this, find a way to get it in a platform that reaches a different group of people. But I don't want to make it sound like I don't think it's a good idea, because I think it's a great idea. I think that it'll, again, attract a lot of attention. I think people will pay attention to it. It's just that I don't know how much you're going to grow the wrestling fan base. And then from Penn State's perspective, they have never been all that crazy about this idea. And, they went to the collegiate wrestling duels, which was 3 matches in one day. But it's not really a tournament. It's more of literally just 3 matches in one day. And so this is more of from what I've been able to gather, just more of a tournament structure. And again, they will, I'm sure, invite Penn State. Penn State will certainly be one of the 16 invited. I would be highly shocked if Penn State is one of the 16 that attends. Because they don't want to ramp up that early in the year. It's going to be in November. They don't want to ramp up then. They want to be ramped up for March. But I'm in agreement with the people who think that if you're going to do this kind of event, it has to be in the first semester. It cannot be in the second semester en route to the national tournament. So, I think it'll be good. I do. And I don't think that every team, like that was Cale Sanderson's point, right? Like does every team need to be there? Does everyone need to be there for this thing to work? And the answer is no, certainly not. And does Penn State need to be there for it to work? No, I don't think so. And I think Penn State fans will watch this still. But ultimately you are creating an event that is invite only, that is not run by the NCAA. So there's no historical tie or legacy or anything to it, and so it's just like any other tournament. You decide to go or you don't, and you move on. And I don't think it needs to be national news if Penn State does or does not go, or if anyone does or does not go.
Right. It's not, as you phrased it, it is not actually a college team championship, because again, you're inviting just 16 teams. You're not inviting up, and I understand like the pool of teams kind of in the same playoff conversation in football. But you've got the Big Ten championship in the regular season. You've got the Big Ten tournament championship. Then you got the NCAA championship. Like, how many championships do you need? How many of these things do you need? How many progressively? Because, you know, the way I understand the cumulative score of the individuals creates a team championship in the NCAA.
Yes,
so
correct.
what function is that serving from, as you pointed out, like, this is not an NCAA event. This is not what you're fighting for. So I mean, I get what you're saying. I also can see where Cael Sanderson is coming from of why would we take our eye off the prize, the ultimate goal, because this is, you know, the reason, one of the reasons they've been successful is they focus on the ultimate goal and they're insanely talented. So let's talk about the next step in that, which is Rutgers coming up this weekend in Piscataway. Greg, what do we know? What do you know about Rutgers, and what do you want to talk about in the preview of that dual meet coming up this weekend?
Yeah, so Nittany Lions head to Rutgers. Should be another good match. Big Ten Network, 8 o'clock Friday night. Another Friday evening spotlight for Penn State, and not a double dual meet weekend. It used to be the norm, T. Frank, to double dual meets Friday, Sunday.
Yeah.
We're pretty much how the January and February portion of the schedule went. Not so much anymore. Penn State will be extremely heavily favored in this match. In fact, I would not be totally shocked if they went 10 for 10. And much like at Nebraska last week, for the most part, your more competitive matches are going to come between 125 and 157. So Dean Peterson was ranked 10th before losing last week. I'm not sure where he dropped to, but he is the Rutgers 125-pound wrestler who will face Luke Lillidahl. So another chance for him to get a ranked win. Maybe not as an impressive one as it would have been before Peterson lost, but still very good, accomplished wrestler, been around for a while. So it would be good resume builder for Luke Lillidahl if he can win that match. 133, Dylan Shawvers, number 9. Braden Davis, of course, for Penn State, will be moving around in the rankings, so that'll be a hotly contested bout at 133 pounds. Maybe the bout of the night, quite frankly, looking at this rundown here. I mean, there's going to be a number of ranked matches in terms of top 5, not as many as last week. Top 10, not as many as last week. But Rutgers will definitely come to wrestle, and Penn State will have to be at its best in Piscataway on Friday night. Slavikowski is the heavyweight there at Rutgers. Hope I got that right. I'm going to do my best James Franklin and apologize for it if not. But he'll face Greg Kirkfleet. That'll be, in terms of the rankings, I think he's number 8 and Kirkfleet's obviously number 2. So that'll probably be the closest match by rankings, or at least the only likely top 10 one. We'll see how things shake out here over the rest of the week. But, some good matches on deck. Rutgers will come to wrestle. They always do. Penn State is heavily favored still to win its 65th consecutive dual meet. And, we'll see if any surprises come along the way. But should be another win for Penn State. Should also be a competitive match. This is not going to be like Michigan State, where it takes like 52 minutes to complete and TV commercials are the only reason it goes beyond an hour. This will be a more competitive match than that. So we'll look forward to covering it over at BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, and then we'll, of course, have a recap of it next week.
All right, and you beat me to it. We'll talk about what happens on the other side on the Penn State Wrestling Show. I guess the thing I'll say is, we'll also have Cael Sanderson's press conference next week as well. Man, you stole my outro. Here's the outro. Here's the outro. Subscribe to BlueWhiteIllustrated.com, and of course here on the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. We're trying to grow this show. Appreciate everyone who's being here. We're back in our regular swing after the Penn State football playoff disrupted everything a little bit at the beginning of January. We're going to have this show once a week all the way through the national championship run and beyond. So subscribe here to the Blue White Illustrated YouTube channel. Like the video. Always appreciate your efforts and helping us in that regard. So next week, we'll talk to you then.